So I got recommended by this video is by a YouTuber called Hikma History. Yeah, Hikma, that's how I'm gonna pronounce it. It's about this guy called Nader Shah, I think. Guys, I'm not good with pronunciation. If you're new to this channel, you'll know that I never pronounce anything correctly. But point is, Nader Shah, the shepherd who became emperor, and he's apparently called the Asian Napoleon. So, yeah, I don't know anything about this guy. Let's find out. I don't really have much else to say other than we should get to it, eh?
At Wayfair, we get pretty excited.
As always, I always put the link to the video down in the description. It's usually always the first link, you know, just so you guys could go watch the video yourselves in case you hate hearing me pause and talk all the time. So yeah.
Old Spice.
Gosh darn it. These freaking ads, dude.
In 1698, a child was born in the mountainous regions of North Khorasan. Despite the fact that he came from no royal lineage, his father being a mere shepherd, he would one day become the last of the Asiatic world conquerors, in the vein of Timur and Genghis Khan. The boy's name was Nader Qawli, meaning servant of the wondrous one. There was nothing about Nader Qawli's circumstances which marked him out for greatness. His ancestry was undistinguished, his place of birth remote, and his social connections were unremarkable. The collapse of the Safavid Empire, however, would provide the opening that a young, ambitious man required.
With Persia being overrun by the Hutaks, Nader took charge of the fight back, expelling the Afghans from the country. From there he established the Afsharid dynasty and declared his mission to conquer lands in all directions. In the process, he became Asia's last great conqueror.
Alright, that's a pretty good start overall. Last great conqueror. Like I said, I've never heard of this man before, but already off the bat, it really gave me King David-esque vibes, mainly just being a shepherd. You know, go from a shepherd to an emperor, and yeah, that's quite the story there, you know? From humble beginnings, right?
At the beginning of the 18th century, Safavid Iran was gripped by a series of social and economic crises. The Safavid monarch, Sultan Hussein, was a well-intentioned but weak ruler who gave over the reins of government to his corrupt ministers. These ministers struggled over political influence, leaving the government paralyzed in its responses to the empire's fiscal crisis, competing with one another to place their own candidates in lucrative positions. One Georgian notable, Gorgin Khan, acquired the governorship of Kandahar, where he established a brutal tyranny. The protestations of the Afghan chieftains of Kandahar fell on deaf ears in the Safavid capital, and tensions grew. The Hutak clan led the Afghan clans of Kandahar to rebellion against Gorgin Khan in 1709, under the leadership of Mirwais Hutak. Despite numerous attempts, the Safavids were unable to regain Kandahar. Soon, other cities began expelling Safavid garrisons and declaring independence. The Afghan Sadozai clan around Herat stormed the city and later began raiding the rest of Khorasan. The Arabs in the Persian Gulf threw off the Safavid yoke as they raided the Iranian coast with impunity. The Kurds and Lurs stopped sending tribute, and the Dagestanis began raiding Azerbaijan. The Safavids were unable to meet any of these challenges, and their weakness only invited more provinces to rebel. Nader Qawli grew up witnessing the collapse of the Safavid order around him. When he was 24 years old, he would have heard of the Afghans raiding towards the Safavid capital, Esfahan. In 1722, the Afghan Mahmud Hutak drew up his army a short distance from Esfahan. The appearance of a hostile army so close to the capital shocked the Safavid nobles into acting.
Wow, this is so interesting. Like I said, we haven't really delved too deep into the Middle East, right? I mean, lately we have, kind of with like the Sassanid Empire, and you know, I'm planning on covering the early rise of the Muslims, and then from then on, the Ottoman Turkish War. So we are starting to shift towards more of the Middle East, but you know, I find that there's so much that happened. I feel like every part of the world so much, but we have mainly covered a lot of Europe. You know what I mean? So again, this is all very new to me. You know, I don't recall ever really studying or learning much about the Middle East back in my school days, or at least nothing that comes to mind at the moment. So it is interesting. I said I also did like when we covered the Caliphate videos from Epic History. I just think that there's so much more to explore. And you know, I'll admit, when I originally started this channel, I wasn't going to be a history guy. I was going to... I know I started with like Dova Hadi and stuff and oversimplified, but I was planning on like branching out to like watching other stuff, other videos, maybe even like non-historical movies, but then I kind of stuck because I gained, you know, a good enough following through history. So like I'm like, well, I guess I ought to stick with it, but I was worried for a bit. Like, what if I like run out of videos to watch? Like, what if I just end up exhausting Kings and Generals and Epic History? But I'm like, nah, there's still so much more to discover and learn. So like, it's a never-ending journey learning in history, but I love it personally. It just makes me not concerned and just enjoying the ride, you know, as I learn more about the world. And just so much has happened. It's insane.
As they assembled a large army of 55,000 men to confront the Afghans, who numbered maybe as low as 11,000. The Safavid army was an impressive sight, with many musketeers, horsemen, cannon, and attendants. The Afghan army, on the other hand, was austere, all mounted and battle-hardened after years of raiding and skirmishing. The battle began with the Afghans on the back foot, but clever maneuvering saw them overrun the Safavid cannons and surround the main Safavid cavalry. The ignominious defeat sealed the fate of Esfahan. Although the Afghans had no siege guns, the Safavid generals inside of the city, who had been so confident of victory, had not prepared for the eventuality of a...
Oh boy. What's the saying? Hope for the best but expect the worst? You know, a very pragmatic sense. Like, even if you are 100% sure, it never hurts to be also a little bit more sure. And that battle he quickly, like, went through was interesting to me. So it seemed like, you know, they had, on paper, way more, going for them. They had, you know, cannons, they had rifles. It seemed like they were more equipped, and you know, meanwhile, the Afghans, as he just mentioned, were mainly only horse-bound. And I was thinking, like, you know, when we covered, like, other battles, usually square formations and stuff would be useful in dealing with an all-mounted army. And, yeah, at least that's how it goes later on, to defeat cavalry. Yeah, usually square formations and stuff would best be used, but it seems like, yeah, wait, let me just go back here. Alright, so it seems like the Afghans, I'm guessing these are the Afghans, they use their mobility, because cavalry really is OP when best utilized, or, no, wait, never mind, I was looking at the wrong, never mind, forget what I said. But either way, yeah, probably best to prepare for the, you know, for the worst. But it does seem like the Afghans, at least what he says, are lacking. Like, they don't have cannons, so I guess besieging or tearing down walls wouldn't be as easy for them, so...
Prepared for the eventuality of a siege. No relief force came to the rescue. In a desperate bid to raise a relief army, Sultan Hussein tasked his son, Prince Tahmasp, with slipping past the Afghan encirclement to raise an army in Iran's northern provinces. Tahmasp and a small group of followers succeeded in slipping past the Afghans, but they could not raise an army in time. After 6 months of siege, the gates of Esfahan opened, and Sultan Hussein and his ministers visited Mahmud Hotak in his encampment. There, the Safavid monarch abdicated, placing the crown of kingship on Mahmud's head. A new dynasty was established in Iran, the Hotaks under Shah Mahmud.
Hey everybody, it's Tony
started.
Robbins and Dean Graziosi. I have a question.
The Afghan Hotaks were of course Sunni Muslims, as opposed to the Safavids and the majority of their subjects, who were Shia. As a result, the establishment of the Hotaks in Isfahan must have been a traumatic event for many of Iran's nobility who had lived under a Shia dynasty for almost 2.5 centuries. As the central Safavid government fell, neighboring empires were alerted to the opportunity for expansion. Peter the Great of Russia occupied the Caspian provinces to the north, whilst the Ottomans took hold of the Caucasus as well as Iran's western provinces, including Azerbaijan and Persian Iraq. The empire was effectively partitioned. Nader Qoli's home province of Khorasan was invaded by a local lord called Malik Mahmud Sistani, who proclaimed himself Shah of Iran, demanding obedience from the region's chieftains. By this time, the young Nader Qoli was a petty warlord in the northern mountains of Khorasan, with less than 2,000 Afshar Turkmen and Kurds under his command. He rejected Malik Mahmud's demand for submission and fought him in several battles. Due to his growing reputation, Nader Qoli was increasingly known by the name Nader, meaning rarity or prodigy. At this early stage, however, Nader was merely one warlord among thousands in a war-torn empire. What changed Nader's fortune was the entrance of the runaway Safavid prince Tahmasp into Khorasan. Tahmasp had been defeated by both the Ottomans and the Afghans, and took refuge in the far-flung province of Khorasan to rebuild his forces. The young warlord pledged allegiance to the prince, and owing to his natural charisma, became a close confidant of Tahmasp's. Nader helped besiege and capture Malik Mahmud, bringing most of central Khorasan under control. As his hold over Tahmasp grew, he began instituting military reforms, making use of disciplined musketeers and artillery to counteract enemy cavalry. The first vindication of
That's
Nader's
smart. Like I was saying, as we know, like I was thinking mainly like the Napoleonic era, like especially when like Napoleon fought the Mamelukes in Egypt, like they were specified to completely operate all on horseback, like their entire army, and so a natural way to counter that was obviously through cannon and also the formations, like tightly packed formations, like the square formation, which horses wouldn't charge recklessly into, thus giving them, an advantage. Obviously, you see that, and it seems like Nader, guys, I apologize. I know my pronunciation ain't good, but I'm just gonna say Nader. So Nader, but like Nader already described as a prodigy, and you're seeing that like he's already utilizing artillery. That's why like later armies, it isn't just cavalry. You need like infantry and artillery. It all works together, and it seems like Nader gets that, at least from what I'm getting, and he's operating in a way to best utilize this. So already like thinking ahead and like adapting and using more of his advantages,
new tactics came in 1728, when he led Tahmasp's army against the Afghans in Herat. Despite some setbacks, the army managed to rout the Afghan cavalry. As the confidence of the men grew in their new fighting methods, eyes were increasingly focused on retaking the Safavid capital from the Hotaks. While Tahmasp and Nader built a new army in Khorasan, the Hotaks had weathered several crises of their own. The first Hotak ruler, Mahmud, was overthrown by his generals when his rule became overbearing and cruel. His replacement, Ashraf, proved to be an intelligent and resourceful young Shah who managed to expand his control over central Iran up to the Persian Gulf. When the Ottomans informed Ashraf that they were going to restore the Safavids and oust the Hutaks from Esfahan, an incensed Ashraf had Sultan Hussein beheaded. Soon after, the advance guard of the Ottoman army was crushed by Afghan cavalrymen in an astonishing battle which proved Ashraf's worth as a commander. He tempered his victory with diplomacy, offering the Ottomans all the provinces which they had occupied in Iran in exchange for their recognition of the Hutak dynasty as the legitimate sovereigns of the country. The legitimacy Ashraf derived from the Ottoman Caliph's official recognition of his reign was considerable. He consolidated his rule in central Iran, and hearing of Tahmasp building a new army in Khorasan, Ashraf did not hesitate to augment his forces and set out to add the far-flung province to his realm. When the armies led by Ashraf and Nader drew up against one another on the plains of Mehman Dost in 1729, they were roughly matched in numbers, although they were composed quite differently. The Afghan army was mostly cavalry, whilst Nader's men were mostly infantry, supported by cannon and a relatively small contingent of cavalry. As the Afghans began charging the line of Iranian musketeers, they came under a heavy artillery barrage, sapping the momentum of their charge. When they came within a dozen feet of the musketeers, they were devastated by a volley at close range. Despite the terrible casualties the Afghan horsemen suffered, they still succeeded in closing with the musketeer line. A flanking force of Afghan cavalry was also met with a high volume of fire, and the Iranian cavalry counterattacked. After a few hours of bitter fighting, Nader's men held their ground, forcing Ashraf to withdraw what remained of his army. Nader had demonstrated the effectiveness of disciplined musketry and artillery support.
Again, genius. He's like up there with those operating in Europe, you know, at least later on. Because I know this was a bit earlier than, at least the Napoleonic era, which, you know, is where I'm more familiar with, like, advanced, you know, artillery, infantry, and cavalry cohesion. But yeah, Nader seems like ahead of the game in that regard, and he used these multiple things, not just cavalry, but infantry and artillery. Like, he's using it all, as, you know, eventually many armies would. And that's already just ahead of the curve, if you will, and that's amazing. Like, you're just seeing his military reforms, his tactics. Again, like, a very smart man.
In facing strong cavalry charges, Nader pursued the Afghans all the way to Esfahan, which they soon evacuated. Tahmasp marched back into his ancestral capital after almost 8 years of absence. As a reward for his services to the Safavid crown, Nader was given the viceroyalty of Khorasan and the hand of Tahmasp's sister in marriage. Subsequently, he followed Ashraf to southern Iran, where the two faced off in a final battle spelling the doom of the Hutak dynasty.
That's amazing, the way he integrated himself with the Safavid, I think it's how it's pronounced, remnants, and essentially won for them, like won it back from the, you know, from the enemy. So already just, wow, again, I always do like seeing these people who come from very humble origins but go on to be such great people. Like, I think it goes with the idea that greatness is something that anyone can achieve if they work hard enough for it, you know what I mean? Like, it is inspiring. I really love learning about people like this, you know? You could take yourself from situations that aren't the most beneficial and make something of yourself. That's kind of like just inspiring to me, you know?
I want to buy your house.
In his new role as the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Army, he set his sights on expelling the Ottomans from the western provinces, managing to recover Kermanshah and Hamadan by defeating the local Ottoman armies stationed there. But he had to terminate his campaign when news reached him from his home province of Khorasan. The Afghans of Herat had broken their non-aggression treaty and attacked Nader's viceroyalty. In a forced march, Nader took his men across the Iranian plateau in a few weeks, pushing the surprised Afghans back into Herat, where he besieged them. The city's chieftains negotiated a surrender, and many Afghan cavalrymen were recruited into Nader's growing army. Whilst his commander-in-chief...
Again, we've seen many forced marches on this channel. Another aspect that always... Yeah, at the time it's you know, I imagine not fun to go through, but it always works out at the... Well, not always, but, you know, like we've seen it work out a lot, and to quickly catch the enemy off guard. And it's just cool to see his military genius and innovation on display. You know, the combined arms, well, yeah, you know, utilizing not just cavalry, but infantry, muskets, and artillery. Maneuvers like this, like a forced march to quickly surprise an enemy. His use of diplomacy, and even integrating enemy units that he sees can be beneficial into his own forces. Like, he's covering it all, especially his diplomacy skill. Like, all around, like I said, I could see why, you know, at least this video called him the Asian Napoleon. You can kind of see that, you know, same skill there, if you would, you know.
Was in the east dealing with the Afghan problem, Tahmasp sought to assert his authority as Shah by leading a victorious campaign against the Ottomans. Initially successful, Tahmasp became overconfident and neglectful in his conduct of the war, suffering a terrible defeat and being forced to sign a humiliating treaty in which he ceded all the territories on the Caucasus north of the Araxes River. Nader seized on this opportunity to expand his powers. He wrote letters to all of Iran's major governors and commanders, informing them that the peace was unacceptable, promising to recover Iran's lost territories to the north of the Araxes. Shortly thereafter, he entered Esfahan, where he initially protested his continued loyalty to the Shah. But in a grand assembly attended by members of the country's nobility, Nader declared that the state could not function with an incompetent Shah at its head. He demanded that they depose Tahmasp and install Tahmasp's infant son Abbas on the throne. Nader claimed that Tahmasp's deposition would be in the interest of the state. This was actually quite an innovative idea in...
Wow, like essentially just removing the leader. I guess coup is the right word, I'm not sure, but wow, already moving. Interestingly, he didn't propose himself. Like, you're already seeing the rise of him, and I'm assuming he's going to get to the point where he's like, I'm the guy in charge, but it's interesting he wants to place someone else, you know? But what's so innovative? I mean, we've seen this before in history, but I wonder what's innovative about it in this particular situation he's about to explain.
Would be in the interest of the state. This was actually quite an innovative idea in the early modern Islamic world. The dynasty and the state, the Dawlat, were understood to be synonymous up to that point. Nader disassociated the state from the Safavid dynasty and associated it with the realm of Iran. He argued that it was their collective duty to recover all of Iran's lost dominions and to free Iranian prisoners from the Ottomans. Instead of a dynasty, it was the state of Iran that Nader tried to foster a loyalty to. This did not mean that he
Oh wow, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that, but his separation between the dynasty and the state, like, that's smarter actually now I think about it. Yeah, fostering a love for the state, like what's best for the state, like, you know, it's kind of like when we operate in what's best for the country kind of a sense, not a loyalty to a particular person, but the country as a whole, which I guess could foster like a nationalistic like fervor and love, you know what I mean? Like, wow, that's smart.
Advocated for the Safavids' overthrow, Tahmasp's son would still, no matter how nominally, be the Shah of Iran. But Nader would act as the child's guardian and the regent, wielding all the real power.
Yeah, I think it is a politically savvy move, right? He's not putting a huge target on his own back, I think, in a sense. If off the bat saying he's the new Shah or, you know, a ruler, essentially using this new guy as a puppet, right? And working behind the scenes, like, huh. I'm kind of impressed by his, like, political savviness, you know what I mean?
The nobles acceded to Nader's wishes, coronating Shah Abbas III in 1732. This new consolidated political position allowed Nader to march on Ottoman Iraq with full confidence. He defeated the local Ottoman forces and besieged Baghdad. Istanbul sent a relief force under the command of one of its most talented and experienced general, Topal Osman Pasha. Arrogantly, Nader divided his forces, leaving behind a portion to continue Baghdad's encirclement, while taking the bulk of his forces to face Topal to the north. Topal chose the field of battle, placing his army in a strong position with easy access to the Tigris River. Nader commanded his army in a frontal assault, hoping to make short work of his counterpart. The Ottoman Janissaries held their ground and both sides suffered heavy casualties. As the battle wore on, Nader's men grew thirsty, and attempts to reach the Tigris River were all blocked by Ottoman detachments which Topal had placed there well in advance. The Iranian army crumbled and fled. Tens of thousands of men and all the Iranian artillery were left on the field. The defenders of Baghdad sallied out to pursue the remnants of Nader's army. When he returned to Iran, he hardly had 15,000 men under his...
Oh dang, a defeat. Yeah, you could see why this enemy commander was described as talented. Oh wow.
Command from an army of 100,000 he had commanded at the beginning of the war.
Oh yeah, that's quite the loss there. Oh my goodness.
This was a make or break moment in his life. So he opened up his coffers and sacrificed all of his accumulated finances in a bid to reconstruct his army in record time. In less than 2 months, Nader rebuilt his army, drilled it, and distributed new cannon among his units. In an
Wow, off the bat, again, like, losing a loss that decisive and big would probably be the end. Or probably would bring someone down pretty fast, but the fact that he managed to rebound off the bat despite that setback and was willing to use his own money to quickly, in just 2 months, that's quick, like, wow. Again, I'm really impressed by this guy, Nader. I find him really, I guess I'm really impressed by him. I love his attributes, if you would, his traits that I'm picking up on.
Expected move, he invaded Ottoman Iraq rather than wait on Topal Pasha's advance into western Iran. Favoring
I see, taking the initiative, not allowing the enemy to press and dictate his victory and advantage.
the age-old step technique of feigning retreat, he drew out Topal's army from Kirkuk. Part of Topal's men were separated from the main army. In a daring maneuver, Nader came between the two Ottoman contingents as he tried to destroy the smaller of the two before the Ottomans could regroup. When Topal...
Divide and conquer. Yes, we've seen this utilized especially through Napoleon, when he would often take on an enemy separately, defeat a smaller contingent, then move on to the next. Like, division and conquer, so many familiar traits that I'm seeing this man use. And apparently, yeah, I think he said the year was, what, 1698? So yeah, this is way before Napoleon. Wow.
Understood what Nader had managed to do, he began marching to save his separated detachment, but arrived too late. As Topal's men approached Nader's army, they saw their comrades defeated and in disarray. Nader then ordered a general advance against the demoralized army of Topal, which routed soon after making contact. In a remarkable reversal, Nader had regained the initiative.
amazing. He started off losing, immediately regrouped, and then fought back and took the initiative despite being in the, you know, at a disadvantage, right? Oh, wow.
His victory re-established his reputation as a military genius. However, he was unable to capitalize on his victory to gain Baghdad, as several revolts had broken out in Iran. He reached an agreement with the local governor of Baghdad and returned to Iran to quell the rebellions. In 1735, Nader crossed the Araxes, laying siege to several fortresses in the Caucasus. The Ottomans sent another relief army. This time, the Iranian conqueror crushed the Ottoman army with merely his vanguard, sealing the fate of the Ottoman garrisons who gave up hope, surrendering one after the other. By this point, Nader had recaptured all the Iranian territories lost under the Safavids since 1722, except for Kandahar. He held a grand assembly in the plains of Moghan in Azerbaijan, summoning all the grandees of the realm, announcing that he intended to retire back to Khorasan and live out his days as a simple peasant. Just
a man of your talents just being a peasant? Heck no. But that's amazing though. Like, he set out exactly, he accomplished everything he wanted to do, at least in terms of taking back the territory, right? Again, driven. So many great traits he exhibits had make a great leader.
Just as his forefathers had done before him. He demanded the grandees elect a new Shah worthy of the throne. The whole affair was an elaborate piece of theatre designed to give Nader's usurpation of the crown a veneer of legitimacy. When the grandees called on Nader to take the throne, some out of fear and others out of sycophancy, Nader accepted. At his coronation,
you know what it gives me? It gives me vibes when, like, Octavian Caesar, after the whole civil wars and stuff, was like, alright guys, alright Senate, I'm gonna step down from power, and you can all, like, you know, run Rome yourself. And then they're like, no, don't! And he's like, I mean, okay, if you want me to. You know, I'm just reminded of that. That was funny. Like, all that theater, let me, you know, let me just go and be a regular Joe again, you know? Step away from all this. Oh man.
Girded with the royal sword, and the royal black aigrette was fixed on the right side of his cap. At the age of 37, Nader had risen from the rank of a peasant to that of an imperial sovereign, ruling one of the largest empires in Eurasia at the time.
Genius. The man is great.
At his coronation in 1736, Nader was proclaimed Shah of Iran. The legend minted on the new royal coins declared, he engraved upon gold the name of sultanship over the world. He is the Nader of Iran land and the conqueror of the universe. Nader was signaling that his ambitions were not restricted to the realm of Iran. He had plans for conquering a vast empire, emulating universal conquerors such as Genghis Khan and Timur. At the coronation assembly, he pledged to all the grandees present that he would march on Kandahar, overthrowing the last of the Hutak dynasty. He also pledged to establish a universal dominion over all the four major imperial realms of the Islamic world. The four realms were Iran, Turan, corresponding to Central Asia, Rum, referring to the Ottoman Empire, and Hindustan, meaning South Asia. Following in the footsteps of Timur, Nader, despite his humble origins, aimed at nothing less than imperial supremacy over the Islamic world. Nader was a shrewd man. He knew that these ambitions for universal conquest were impossible to realize if the sectarian tensions within the Islamic world remained unsolved. The Iranians under Nader's rule were predominantly Shia, whereas the majority of the inhabitants and rulers of Turan, Hindustan and the Ottoman Empire was Sunni. If Nader was to expand his imperial control over neighboring realms, he needed a new religious discourse which reconciled sectarian differences. thus allowing new Sunni subjects across Asia to be incorporated into his empire.
Smart.
So he came up with a religious creed called Jafarism. For Iranian audiences, Nader described Jafarism as the true and uncorrupted version of Shia Islam that had existed prior to the Safavid takeover. He banned extremist practices such as the ritual cursing of the first 3 caliphs of Islam prior to Ali, and he banned mourning rituals which commemorated the martyrdom of Ali's son, Imam Hussein, especially those ones which involved self-flagellation. However, nothing in terms of the actual theological content of Shi'ism was altered, and Nader was keen to portray himself as saving Shi'ism by returning to its original Jafari form.
I like the religious pragmatism that he's showing. Obviously, the thing about empires is you need to integrate like conquered territories, right, into it. And I like he's already ahead of the curve in terms of, okay, religion's a pretty big driving, unifying force for a lot of people. So him like bringing this Jafarism and using it to try to help create a more unified, factor. I just think it's really smart. I call it religious pragmatism, and he seems to be well versed in it. Like, we've covered a few people who've used it to varying success on this channel. I'm not sure how it's exactly gonna work, but assuming how far his imperial ambitions go and how much territory conquers, we're gonna have to see. But again, like all great conquerors, he's ambitious and he wants to accomplish a lot. So we'll see.
Before the Safavids had corrupted it by introducing extremist practices. The official narrative was that by forsaking fanatical customs, the Jafari Shia could be reconciled with their Sunni brethren for the sake of Islamic unity. For Sunni audiences, on the other hand, Nader wanted to portray his Jafari creed as a wholesale conversion of Iranians to Sunniism. He spoke of Jafarism as a 5th school of Sunni jurisprudence which existed alongside the other 4 established Sunni schools, those being the Hanafi, Shafi, Hanbali and Maliki. Hence, Nader sought to gain religious acceptance for Iranians as followers of Sunni Islam who merely adhered to another, the 5th school of jurisprudence. He emphasized that all 5 schools of jurisprudence were united in their core beliefs and practices, and therefore the adherents of all of those schools were fellow Muslims. In this way, Nader cultivated an image of himself as a unifier of Sunni Islam, the man who removed all corrupt practices among the Shia and returned them to the Sunni fold.
Yeah, I think it's the way he's portraying himself. It's also kind of like a PR move, right? This great unifier. I mean, conqueror, yeah, definitely is the term, but I think sometimes we could look at a conqueror. You can kind of see it as a, depending on where you stand, kind of a negative thing, like, but I think unifier is such a great word to be used, because it just makes such a more positive image of oneself, And I really feel like he is utilizing this really well.
The overall message was still one of Islamic unity, but was inflected to appeal to Sunni rather than Shia audiences.
My mom, 58, did this to become debt-free.
Having proclaimed his mission of unifying the Islamic world under his imperium, Nader set out to destroy the Hutak kingdom of Kandahar in Afghanistan in 1737. Although the Afghan army was defeated several times outside the gates of Kandahar, they retreated into the city walls to offer stiff resistance. Several attempts to penetrate Kandahar's defenses were beaten back decisively, as Nader settled down into a siege which would last over a year, the longest siege of his life. By March 1738, Nader's artillery had made enough progress for him to assemble assault columns to take Kandahar's walls. Each column was equipped with ladders to scale the walls and establish a foothold within the city. the troops from the Bakhtiyari clan led the first successful assault against Kandahar, and by nightfall, most of the Afghan troops had withdrawn to the citadel. The relentless bombardment by Nader's mortars convinced the defenders to surrender the citadel, and the Hutak Shah was officially pardoned and sent to live out the rest of his days in northern Iran. Nader would later have him poisoned to put a definitive end to the Hutak dynasty. Having conquered Kandahar, he conscripted tens of thousands of new Afghan soldiers into his army. These Afghan contingents came to occupy a privileged position in his military and were some of Nader's most effective cavalry forces, serving him loyally until the end of his life. Having consolidated control over the Afghan clans in the east of his empire, Nader turned his attention to the Mughals in Hindustan. A mighty empire at the beginning of the 18th century, Mughal Hindustan had undergone a rapid decline by 1739, when Nader would invade from the north. The Mughal emperor, Muhammad Shah, was slow to respond to Nader's seizure of Kabul and Ghazni, both of which fell to the Iranian conqueror without much resistance. Nader's advance was however checked by a local Mughal governor at the Khaybar Pass, a narrow mountain path which led into the Punjab. One of his Afghan generals alerted him to the existence of an alternative path through the mountains. So he put together an elite detachment of riders, personally leading them through the narrow snowy mountain pass. He arrived at the Mughal army's rear. The unexpected arrival of Nader on their tails meant that the demoralized Mughals could muster only a token of resistance and were soon routed. The road to Hindustan's interior lay open, and soon Peshawar and Lahore were conquered. The rapid advance of Nader's troops into the country alarmed the Mughal court, hastening the provision of the Mughal...
Again, I really do love how much initiative he takes. Like, he's never on the back foot, and when he is, he quickly reverses the situation. And it's kind of a huge part in war, kind of just taking the initiative and being the one to kind of dictate how things are going. And it seems like Nader is just completely a master of that, you know? And yeah, again, like I'm actually really looking forward near the end of the video to see how large his realm is, because I'm like wondering, he's effective. I think that's the word I would use to describe him. Just very effective in all he does. And, you know, it's almost like, yeah, just very effective.
Imperial army. The army which departed Delhi was perhaps 100,000 strong, 300,000 if we include camp followers and retainers, and had a large number of cannon and war elephants. Hearing of the approach of Muhammad Shah, Nader slowed his advance and began dispatching scouting parties around the plains of Karnal, not far from Panipat, where many of India's fateful battles had been fought. The Iranian army established a fortified camp to the north of Karnal's plains. Nader arrayed his army of 50,000 men facing southward towards the Mughal camp, but he soon began siphoning off contingents to scout and skirmish ahead of the main force. Meanwhile, the Mughal camp was receiving reinforcements from Saadat Khan, who arrived at the camp ahead of his men. As he was received by Muhammad Shah, Saadat Khan was suddenly informed that the rear of his column was ambushed by Iranian cavalrymen, who had carried off his baggage and cannon. Although the other Mughal generals implored him to act cautiously and await the deployment of the Mughal army en masse, Saadat Khan gathered his forces and marched on to the plains of Karnal. Muhammad Shah and his generals argued among themselves whether the rest of the army should follow Saadat Khan or not. Eventually, the imperial army began to deploy troops in support in a piecemeal fashion. In contrast to the disunity in Mughal command, Nader wielded confident control over his troops. He had
his use of discipline is another aspect. Like, he've mentioned it before, but he also just wields his army with great discipline, which gives... Again, discipline is an aspect that has been the cause of many great armies to become as successful as they were. Like, a big war with the Romans is the legionaries' discipline. You know, you'll often hear about discipline, and it's true. It's a huge aspect of what makes, you know, a successful army, and he seems to wield that as well really well. This video is just me glazing this man. This video is me admiring him the entire time, being like, man, this guy's awesome. Like, you kidding me? But like, it's true though. Like, he exhibits so many traits that we've seen throughout all the videos we've watched, and you know, like, he's just another great person.
His elite musketeers and a detachment of artillery to separate from the main Iranian army, subsequently redeploying them further south near a village called Kunjapura. Nader then began sending other units to skirmish with Mughal forces in the plains of Karnal, pulling them in separate directions. Whilst Saadat Khan was lured northwards towards the Iranians' main battle line, Nader began sending some units to lure Mughal reinforcements away and towards the Kunjapura village. The elite Iranian musketeers suddenly appeared. Supported by artillery, they fired volley after volley into the reinforcing Mughal columns. The incessant musketry and artillery barrage drove the Mughal elephants wild, sowing great chaos among the Mughal troops as they lost cohesion. Saadat Khan came into contact with the main Iranian line and was similarly subjected to a hail of musketry, with his men unable to return adequate fire. The Mughal noble was eventually taken prisoner when an Iranian cavalryman reached his war elephant and intimidated him into surrender.
Wow.
In the meantime, further south near the village of Kunjpura, Nader's musketeers had made short work of the Mughal columns, killing and capturing numerous generals. Nader then ordered these troops to charge northwards and take Saadat Khan's men in the flank. By nightfall, the only Mughals on the plains of Karnal were either killed or captured. As Mughal
I really
troops...
like the paintings. I mean, I know that I haven't commented on this yet, and he's shown a lot of these, but I really love the paintings depicting of like this area in the world. Like, I don't know why, it's just something like, I don't know, like, how to describe it, but I really love it. Also, I kind of like am looking at the background, some of the more bloodier aspects, like a head on this stick. But I don't know like what to call it. But I'll admit the elephants look a bit weird. They look like Dr. Seuss elephants, you know, like like Dr. Seuss drew the elephants. But overall, yeah, I don't know what it is about it, but I really love this art style that he's constantly showing through these paintings, you know? It's like unique to me. I find it like nice to look at.
fled back into their camp. They soon realized they could not leave.
Do you want to know where to invest 1,000?
The Iranians had surrounded their camp with artillery and blocking detachments. With no hope of escape, Muhammad Shah was obliged to ride out and submit to Nader, who received him with all the respect and pageantry due to a fellow sovereign. It was decided that Nader would accompany Muhammad Shah to Delhi in order to settle the terms for a new alliance. In reality, however, the Mughal ruler was made a vassal of Nader. In a strange coronation ceremony in Delhi, Nader re-coronated Muhammad Shah as the ruler of Hindustan, personally attaching the royal diadem on his turban.
That's such a power move. Like, as I'm interpreting it, it's like, I'm allowing you to be the ruler, you know? At least that's how it comes across to me. Like, I'm the one with the power, I'm allowing you, I'm making you. Wow, just a power move overall, you know? At least that's how I'm interpreting it, you know?
In exchange for restoring Muhammad Shah to his previous position, Nader annexed all territories north of the Indus River to Iran and laid claim to the Mughal treasury. As the Shah, or King of Kings, Nader demanded tribute not only from his new vassal Muhammad Shah, but also from Mughal governors across Hindustan. A colossal sum of money and valuables was accumulated, such that Nader issued an edict which suspended most taxes in Iran for a period of 3 years. The imperial army was also open to new recruits, and many ambitious Hindustani officers and soldiers decided to join Nader's service. Nader had established imperial control over 2 of the 4 imperial realms in the Islamic world, Iran, which he controlled directly, and Hindustan, which he controlled indirectly through his vassals and tributaries. To legitimate his imperial sovereignty over the Mughals and future vassals across the Islamic world, Nader relied on the idea that he was the leading figure of a dynastic clan of Turkmenid sovereigns who ruled all 4 of the Islamic realms: the Naderids in Iran, the Mughals in Hindustan, the Chengizids in Turan, and the Ottomans in Rum. As the foremost ruler among all his Turkmenid peers, Nader demanded submission and tribute from Turan, Rum, and Hindustan. The idea of the Turkmenids was a foreign concept to the Mongol-descended rulers in Turan and Hindustan, but they were made to accept Nader's imperial ideology as they fell under his control. Consequently, Muhammad Shah was made to acknowledge his junior position relative to his elder Turkmenid brother, Nader Shah. To bind this new dynastic community together, Nader established marriage alliances whilst at Delhi, marrying his son to Muhammad Shah's daughter. Despite an uprising in Delhi, Nader re-established brutal control, leading to the massacre of tens of thousands of people. Having crushed all resistance, he then marched back into Iran, where he immediately began making preparations for new campaigns, this time against the Central Asian Khanats in Turan. In 1740, the Khanat of Bukhara, ruled by the descendants of Genghis Khan, was overawed by Nader's military superiority, leading it to submit without resistance. The Bukharan ruler, Abul Faiz Khan, was given the title of Shah in order for him to be made a vassal of the Iranian Shahanshah. Just as in Hindustan, Nader claimed to be conferring the crown on his lesser Turkmenid brother, making him an official vassal. Marriages were also arranged. Abul Faiz Shah's sister and daughter were wed to Nader and Nader's second son respectively.
Not only is he, he's a man who can do it all, you know, not only is he a genius in terms of the battlefield, but also in terms of politics. Like, he can play the game, which is just great, you know?
The Naderids, descended from mere shepherds, were consolidating their ties to some of the most prestigious imperial households in Asia, such as the Timurid Mughals and the Chengizids of Turan. Nader's ideology of universal dominion over the Islamic world and primacy amongst the Turkmenid rulers of that world was given greater credibility with the conquest of Bukhara. Soon, other Khanats in Turan also fell to Iranian armies and were made to pay tribute. The tributaries established in the region were many, reaching up to the modern-day frontier of China. Many Uzbeks and Tatars in the region were conscripted into the imperial army. Nader annexed all the territory south of the Oxus River to Iran and began making preparations for a new campaign in the Caucasus, specifically Dagestan. His overconfidence, combined with the difficult mountainous terrain and the Dagestanis' indefatigable resistance, meant that the imperial army was soon caught in a destructive guerrilla war which drained both its manpower and its treasury. The Dagestanis avoided pitched battles and relied on intelligent use of the terrain to ambush and harass imperial troops. Despite many years of brutal warfare, Dagestan was not completely subdued, although Nader managed to gain the nominal submission of most of Dagestan's nobles in exchange for withdrawing his men. It was an effort to save face by Nader, especially as war with the Ottomans seemed increasingly likely. He wrote several letters to the Ottoman Sultan, informing him that Iraq, Diyarbakir, and West Azerbaijan were historically Iranian lands, which he held a rightful claim to. Using the restoration of Iran's territorial frontiers as a pretext for war, Nader invaded Ottoman Iraq in 1743. Despite overwhelming military superiority, Nader's sieges of major Ottoman strongholds in the area were frustrated by his lack of patience and Ottoman stubbornness. Nonetheless, the outcome seemed to be in no doubt. Ottoman Iraq was expected to fall to Nader eventually. But before that happened, worrying news began reaching Nader from Iran, as rebellion spread across the land calling for his overthrow. Because the number and severity of these rebellions grew, Nader was forced to terminate his Ottoman campaign and return his armies to Iran to reimpose order. The rebellions were put down with great cruelty, as Nader believed the people had robbed him of his conquest. He claimed that he would have conquered Rome if it were not for his disloyal subjects. The severity with which these rebellions were subdued did not discourage new rebellions from emerging. The Ottomans observed the situation keenly and seized on the moment to strike.
Oh dang it, this seems to be his downfall. Things were going well until that guerrilla warfare at the Caucasus, right? It's always a guerrilla warfare that helps undo great leaders. Frickin', like, I just thought, like, Napoleon in Spain. I keep bringing up Napoleon because he seems to be compared to Napoleon. But, you know, like, that kind of situation. And then now it's, like, all these rebellions and his cruel, you know, dealing with them. And I guess the Ottomans are going to try to be like, hey, if you hate this guy, join us. At least that's what I'm gonna guess they're gonna try to go for. Like, we're better or something. Or just encourage more rebellions, which will keep Nader distracted.
A large Imperial Ottoman army crossed the border in 1745. Nader checked its advance at the border and both armies dug in. The artillery duel between them lasted several days, but the Iranian gunners bested their Ottoman counterparts. The following battles saw the Ottoman army defeated and chased back into its encampment. The Ottoman army disintegrated shortly after, and Nader's son also scored a major victory near Mosul, bringing the war to a conclusion. The Ottomans, convinced that they had nothing to gain by resuming hostilities, sued for peace. Nader, under increasing pressure from the growing rebellions in Iran, was only too eager to accept peace. By 1746, the sides exchanged diplomats and negotiators to finalize a treaty. The peace did not bring tranquility to Iran. Nader's position was increasingly precarious, and no amount of brutal suppression seemed to be effective against stemming the tide of rebellion. He would enter cities and massacre officials and generals who he deemed were disloyal or negligent. Their severed heads were used to erect towers of skulls as an...
Yeah, we've seen a lot of heads on pikes in this video, I've noticed. Yeah, he seems very brutal, a very brutal man when he's crossed, doesn't he?
Ominous warning to others. By 1747, Nader entered his home province of Khorasan, where his career as a warlord had begun. Some of his oldest serving generals, and even members of his own household, were in open rebellion against him at this point. In his own camp, tensions were brewing between the Iranian officers who were sympathetic to the rebels and the Afghan and Uzbek officers who remained steadfastly loyal. On June 20th, 1747, a few dozen Iranian officers from Nader's own imperial guard broke into his tent and assassinated him.
Oh.
He was only 48 at the time of his assassination, but he had reigned as an imperial overlord to much of the Islamic world, even if his dream of establishing unchallenged supremacy over it remained unrealized.
It was a really lofty and high ambition of his, which all great conquerors have in common. You know, I don't think you could be a great conqueror without goals like that, but... wow, what a way to go. Man, got murdered. It seemed like things quickly fell apart, though. At the apex of his power, it's like... just suddenly everyone started turning on him, like, you know, rebellions and all that, and... yeah, it's like... wow, what a way to go. Like, a really quick downfall there. And he was so young, too, only 48.
In the years following his death, the empire disintegrated between warring successors, none of which equaled Nader in the extent of their conquests. To this day, Nader remains the last of the great Asiatic conquerors. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Great video. This is the first time I've ever seen this YouTube channel, but it was really informative and really well done. Thank you for the recommendation, and I'll see you guys tomorrow when we start something new. Goodbye.